Good afternoon and welcome, friends and neighbors. Thank you for joining us on this edition of MedTalks. Today's topic is loneliness and connection. This virtual broadcast is once again brought to you by the Sechelt Hospital Foundation and our very good friends at the Sunshine Coast Credit Union, who we can always rely on to be there when we need them. Technical services by Vasari Media Group and help from lots of people who you never get to see on camera. My name is Joanna Piros. I am pleased to be on the board of the Sechelt Hospital Foundation and also to serve as your host for these conversations, which we hope will help to cultivate our collective resilience. I'm sure you all know people who have struggled with being alone and being in isolation, but you probably also know people that are like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to get together with all those people, who have kind of craved the opportunity to be alone. So we all respond differently. Over these past 2 months, I've really been missing my parents and my kids and my family in general. So on Mother's Day, we made the decision after 2 months of isolation to go over to the city for the day, met with each of the kids and parents separately, outdoors, physically distanced, that sort of thing. And it was fantastic to see everyone. And then I came home and I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed with all of that sudden onslaught of connection. And so I wonder if maybe the speed dating model of reconnecting was not the best choice for me. So I'll be really interested to hear what our panel thinks about how people deal with loneliness and also how they deal with connectivity. We will be taking your questions, so of course use the chat feature to type them. And now let me introduce our fantastic panelists. Dr. Ral Gupta works as an integrative medical physician, professional coach, and mindfulness instructor. Dr. Lisa Kitt is a registered psychologist who specializes in traumatic stress and related mental health injuries. And Dr. Marius Velgemoot is a consultant psychiatrist with Vancouver Coastal Health. He is the psychiatry lead for the Sunshine Coast and also lectures at the University of British Columbia. So Lisa, I'm going to go to you first. Given that we all do respond differently to loneliness, connection, isolation, what is your sense of kind of the prevailing feeling right now out in the community?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here today. Joanna, that's a great introduction and good start. I think before I get to some of the summary things that I'm seeing and a few of the research studies that have come out in recently since the pandemic started, as I was reflecting on today and what we were going to talk about, it struck me that we started these MedTalk discussions distinguishing between physical distancing and social distancing. And we were really begging people to ensure that they were socially connected during this time and practicing physical distancing, but really not social distancing. And as I was thinking about today's topic, I mean, it's so basic for me as a psychologist that we stay socially connected. We know that social connection, those core relationships in our lives, is a protective factor for so many mental and physical health issues for us. And on the flip side, it's a risk factor. So lack of relationships, lack of social connection really is a risk factor for a whole host of mental health and physical health issues. Some research suggests that a lack of social connection is equivalent in terms of lifespan longevity to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so really, we're actually very much wired for connection. And it's not only feels good, but it's actually very important for our physical and mental health. Okay, so some of the research that is coming out, and there's not a whole lot yet. The Canadian Mental Health Association did a fairly small study, but a study in Canada for Canadians. I think one of the funny things that they did was ask, how are you? And, what do you think Canadians always say? I'm fine, thanks. And indeed, that's what they said. They said, I'm fine, thanks. Despite in the research, 63% of people were feeling more negative emotions and versus 37% positive emotions. So we're feeling a lot more negative emotions since the pandemic, but still we're fine, which is so classic Canadian for me. In that same study, 45% were feeling anxious, and only 9% noted that they were happy. Which I think is an interesting thing we could talk about. And maybe in terms of this content, why only 9% are feeling happy as we're in isolation. And one other study I'm going to mention really quickly, the Sun Life Financial study came out. 56% of Canadians noted that they were experiencing mental health difficulties during this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it's really difficult for us to tease apart how many of those people were experiencing mental health issues before, but most of the research is showing that during the pandemic, people are struggling more than they were before. So despite during this pandemic, there's a huge growth in different video conferencing and people trying to stay socially connected, feeling isolated has actually increased. So there's some data on isolation rates before the pandemic and then after. And so it's interesting, 39% noted that they were isolated before the pandemic compared to 47% during the pandemic, which was just a couple weeks ago. And those people noted that they were really craving some real authentic connection. And one of the main concerns that people talked about was that feeling of social isolation and attributing that to their 56% mental health rates. So I think one of the things we're going to talk about here is the importance of loneliness, the importance of social isolation, and the antidote to that, which is social connection. As I sit with clients and as I sit with friends and clients, so this loneliness, being socially isolated, is a massive risk factor generally. And I think it's just amplified again during the pandemic now. And so I have some real concerns about the outcomes of this for people in general, particularly because I don't think a lot of us have done a really great job at social connectedness during this time of physical isolation. What do you guys think? How is that landing for you as I sort of go over some of the stats that have started to come out?
Very interesting, and I think it's very significant. I'm very fascinated by the interaction between physical distancing and social distancing, because initially it was easy to say, okay, so let's all focus on physical distancing, but not social distancing. On the contrary, let's look at social connectedness. However, it has a tremendous impact if you're not able to spend some time with someone in a physical sense. The impact that it has on social connectedness. So it's very interesting. I see when I work with my patients on a daily basis, I see a broad range of experiences when it comes to social isolation. I see a certain subgroup of people being rather comfortable with social isolation, and I often get the comment, that's not that much different than the life I used to know. For other people, it is a significant difference, and they're suffering tremendously because of that. Now, we touched a little bit on the fact that we will reflect on our own styles of connecting a little bit later as we go, sort of highlighting our own experiences as well. But I want to just sort of make that point that, yes, I do see the full range of experiences. And I do acknowledge that people are suffering tremendously because of the social isolation. And sometimes that can manifest in many different ways. Raul, I don't know what you've been seeing.
Yeah, no, I've been seeing similar things to what you guys have been saying, and hearing you speak, maybe just reinforcing some of the things that I'm hearing you say and also are true for me. Lisa, just some of the stats you were sharing reminded me that loneliness has actually been a significant issue for years. And on some level, the pandemic is helping us, like a lot of other mental health issues, it's helping us address something that in some ways I'm quite grateful we're having these conversations, because it, as you said, it's a huge issue for our health. And so in some ways, I've heard some people, and I feel this sometimes myself, I've made choices where I'm like, well, I don't have time this week to connect with friends. And then as I think about it this way, it's like, wow, I don't have time not to, because it's that important to us to prioritize. And so I agree with what you're saying with both of you. It's like we have to find a way and yet do it in ways that suit us. And I'm noticing a huge spectrum of different people in the same way, Maris, you're describing. I just recently was reading an article that was talking about this idea of the reflected self, and the idea that through our basic interactions and our rituals of spending time together, if you're in the workplace, even just bumping up against your workmate or sharing a little bit about your day, those little minor interactions actually, and the responses people give us to each other, give us a sense of ourself, give us a sense of what we project, whether, wow, you're a trustworthy person, you're a funny person, you're a hardworking person, you're somebody who's caring. And now suddenly, without those opportunities, it's not just that we're not getting the joy of that, we actually might not get a sense of who we are. Like there's this kind of sense of being adrift that I think happens when we don't have those spontaneous opportunities. Now everything's got to be scheduled in a very concrete way. And then I think about healthcare workers, some of which I'm working with now. There's this added feature that, we're wearing masks. People are wearing masks and all dressed up. I've had some colleagues say they don't even recognize their friends when they're standing right beside them in the hospital. And so we can't even see each other's facial expressions, which is like a huge part of our sense of connection. So like there's lots of pieces to this that I think we could unpack further. And maybe just the last part I'll say, I really think it's important we have that distinction between loneliness, which is more a perceived sense of isolation, and aloneness, which can be very different. It's actually, to me, aloneness is actually quantifiable by the number of interactions we're having. A perceived sense is more a felt sense of being on our own. So you could be alone and not feel lonely. You could be with a bunch of people and feel incredibly lonely because there's this perceived sense of not being with others. And what's interesting in some of the studies that I've seen is that some of the younger people right now, the people 18 to 22 even, are perhaps the most lonely because, they may be on digital devices, they might be on devices more, and they're actually seeing all these interactions that are happening that they're not a part of, or they're missing even the more in-person kind of encounters that maybe they weren't getting a lot of before either. So there's a lot of pieces here, I think, a really fascinating part that I hope we continue to unpack over the coming hour.
We've learned so much through this experience, and we've learned new things about old phenomena that we have known for so long, but we have a different light being shone on what we are seeing. It takes my mind back to an ad that I saw one day. Well, you were just saying that loss of emotional connection by not understanding or seeing someone's facial expression. I saw someone, I don't know where in Canada, produce a mask that had like a cutout with a transparent. Now, I won't comment on the medical validity of that, but I can comment on the social meaning and the need for connectedness, that need to see someone's facial expression. That's pretty essential. The other important thing that I also see in this time of isolation and loneliness is how isolation and loneliness can be a predisposing factor to developing a psychiatric or a psychological disorder, yet it can also be a consequence of a disorder. So sometimes, let's just use depression. It's such a well understood entity. Someone can become depressed because they are isolated and alone, or someone can become isolated and alone because they're suffering from depression. So that's another layer of complexity that's added to this discussion. Raul, your point on the actual meaning of loneliness is so valuable. We've seen that so many times. You can be between 1,000 people and be so lonely, or you can be on your own and not be so lonely. So again, there's another layer of complexity, and I love layers of complexity. That's what we do. Lisa, you're the emotional expert when it comes to complexity.
I love emotional complexity. My brain is just going crazy as you think about this from a biological perspective too. I'm really curious. So in isolation, we're wired, I really believe, but biologically we're wired for connection, right? There's something that's soothing. As a baby can't survive without connection, right? It's just so basic. And so what happens in our nervous systems when we are isolated and alone? My sense is we go into a state of fear, right? Panic almost at an extreme, but some fight or flight response that takes us into a state of a hyper arousal. And that's really exhausting. So that loneliness is also, although it's not good. It's exhausting on a whole bunch of different levels as well. And so I see that in my patients, my clients all the time. I actually had one reach out to me this morning. Just she struggles, and so people who are struggling even more now. That's what I'm seeing overall. And she just said, I'm so lost right now. I feel disconnected. I feel completely alone, and I'm so scared. And so I just need some contact. Can you be that person for me right now? Right. And so she was really able to articulate what she needed. I can't fix that for her, but I certainly can connect as a human being and help her not feel alone. And sometimes that's all we can do for people. And that is enough just to connect and not have people be alone. It's life-saving, actually. So I think that soothes her nervous system, actually.
Mm-hmm. I've seen so many times in my life and in my practice that just being with someone, is
Yeah.
sometimes the best thing. You know,
Yeah.
as clinicians and physicians, we have a mindset of we need to fix this. We need to make the world a better place. We need to save. But sometimes just being with someone is exactly what they need.
And
And
caring.
absolutely, you know. So when I look at connectedness, I also see a very different meaning when it comes to different people. For someone connecting on a common interest of golfing on a Saturday morning, it's beautiful. They love that, just that connecting around. Someone else wants to meet little bits with various people, which doesn't quite suit the viral pandemic. But some people like a broader connecting, less deep, if I can say it like that. Other people want, like, I need one person in my life, but I really need to connect. I need to connect intensely with that person. So I find it interesting, different definitions of how people view connection, and also the different styles people use to connect. Our need for connection is very much based on our personality, and we can maybe go into a little bit of a discussion about how we're all different in our individual personal needs for connecting. So
We're a bit of a
Raul,
continuum. Yeah.
oh, we're like from the two ends of the spectrum with some balance in the middle.
Let's describe that for them.
Right. So Raul, you start off.
Well, so my personal comfort is, I'm certainly much more of an introvert, and so I'll be honest and say I'm not on social media. I find it really challenging to navigate a lot of different relationships, and I find it stressful. So I don't need a lot of friends. I mean, it's quite different even 30 years from now. I mean, 30 years past, I used to be much more connected to a lot of different people, but something shifted in the last 20 years, and I find I just need brief but really intimate connections with a core group of people, and that really feeds me. So actually, I find in some ways I can relate to those people who are enjoying that aspect of the pandemic. I know that sounds really horrible to say on one level, but there's something about it for me that I find actually suits my pace a little bit better, because I feel less pressure to be doing a bunch of things socially. And if anything, I'm actually more busy than I would like to be. I'm connecting more in some ways online than I might previously. So I'm almost having to contain some of my connections because of that challenge. So maybe I'll stop there and hear from a few of you before I share some other thoughts.
Should we go to the other extreme first?
Let's go to the other extreme. Now, for my panel members and for those that know me, it might come as a wonderful surprise that I'm very much an extrovert. Just teasing, it's like a no-brainer. However, I need connection. I need lots and lots and lots of it. I need busyness. I need the buzz. I need to wake up. I need to have a plan in the morning. At 5 a.m. I have my first commitment, and I keep it going until until the day is done. So I am absolutely in need of connecting with people. So if you want to drive me absolutely dilly, then I have to just be at home. I find it ridiculously stressful. And as much as I am efficient and I get stuff done, and in many ways people can say I've achieved, I have not learned the skill of being alone really well. And I know that's such a fundamental part of just that personal success in life, is being able to tolerate loneliness or being alone. I can tell you without a doubt and with no shame that I am not even close to that. I suffer if I'm on my own, and that's just the bottom line. So Lisa, please bring some balance into this discussion.
Well, what I'm hearing from both of you is just a classic definition of the true difference between introversion and extroversion, actually, and how that impacts our feelings of loneliness. And so it's not just about being alone or being with people, it's about loneliness. I don't hear loneliness, Raul, from you as you are alone. But from Marius, I'm hearing that if he was alone, he would feel very lonely. So for me, the true definition of introversion to extroversion, introversion, right, is how we gain our energy. So when we're really depleted, How do we gain our energy? And I hear so strongly from you, Marius, that it's about being with people, being stimulated, being around noises and people talking and background noise and just stimuli, where that would stress Raul out. I mean, you can do it. I know you well enough to know you can do it, but if you really want to recharge, it's more about those quiet spaces, more depth of connection, but very few people probably, and lots of alone time to recharge. In terms of disclosure, I'm somewhere in the middle, closer to Raul, though, especially in the last 10 years or so. I think especially given what we do for a living, I have a lot of connection and depth-oriented connection with a lot of people, being a psychologist. It's interesting, though, during this pandemic, I haven't left the house very often. I go for long hikes, but I haven't seen my people very much. And so there's a few people, although not a lot, to be honest, but that depth-oriented connection is a few people I really miss. And so it's an interesting thing. But lonely, but what prevents the loneliness for me is those depth-oriented connections, those really vulnerable, open, soothing, and they don't have to happen very often. So I love that we're sort of, it's a non-pathologizing way to look at personality and to see how we're all wired in different ways, right? There's no shame in that conversation. We're supposed to be different. That's what makes this panel interesting, and also what makes the world go around.
Just as you're sharing that, Lisa, what was coming into my mind really clearly was this idea that we all need connection. That's a basic human need.
Yes.
And yet there's countless ways that we can experience it.
Lovely.
And so then the key thing is we have to get to know ourselves a little bit. We have to kind of know what really works for us and be comfortable with that. And when it comes to this pandemic, what it brings up for me also is being curious about those that we care about, and what might be their modes of connection. They may not be the same as ours.
Yeah.
I've seen this this new resurgence to people writing letters. Like, who gets a letter anymore? Hardly anybody actually gets a letter in the mail. But what a wonderful way. I know when I was growing up, that kind of tells you how old I am. But I remember growing up, I used to get letters from friends, and I used to send them out. And it was one of the most amazing things. You'd have to actually spend the time to write a letter, and you'd wait weeks for the person to actually receive it. And it was like a fascinating way to connect. And so there may be people in our community that will want connection in various ways. And so for us to be curious and asking each other, how would you like to connect? Would it be online? Would it be by the phone? Would it be by writing letters to each other? However it might be, I think that could be a really interesting way for us to move forward, even as a community, to be curious, both about ourselves and other people.
Yeah, it's interesting because the point you're making is we need to be somewhat aware of how other people want to connect. For example, myself, blazing guns, anytime, let's go, let's do this. But people are not always that way, right? Nope. So I need to be sensitive enough. I need to take into consideration other people's perspective and just how they do things and how they connect. And that's a very healthy skill to develop. I also want to add to the point of non-pathology in this discussion, non-pathology, is how normal it is for our differences. Many times when I work with patients or just friends, people in life, I always say to people, for the first 20 years of being an adult, my wife would still question that. I always thought that I needed to correct my weaknesses. I needed to deal with them and get it all over and done with. Now, as I am gradually moving through the years, I am realizing there's more value in knowing your weakness well. Certain things in life you're just not going to get away from. I probably will never be comfortable with being on my own, but I do realize that I will be on my own at times, and I am on my own at times, and I need to develop skills to deal with those times instead of trying to desperately run away from those times. Because I will look somewhat strange if I go stand in the street and just sort of invite people in because I'm on my own. Hey, what are you doing? I'm just walking my dog, sir. Please stay away from me. So it's about knowing our weaknesses. Yeah.
Listening to you, Marius, one of the things I think about all the time is that we're in a crisis of disconnection. I really think about my clients and sort of those deep mental health states that are fairly excruciating, it's because they're so alone in them. Right. And so this deep, this crisis of disconnection. And I think the answer to it is what you just said, although I would frame it a little differently. I think that openness and vulnerability, you said the word weakness. I don't like that word because I don't think they're weaknesses. I think they're just part of who we are. And so those vulnerabilities in us, and to share those openly without shame, to go back to our last week's topic, but to just be able to connect from a deep place of just belonging in yourself and belonging in the world and belonging in community, and to not judge ourselves in that place, just to be just open. And so if you need to go out into the road and go, hi, and to talk to people, that's okay too. It's okay. It's whatever you bring to the table. I think just for people to really just know who they are and be okay with who they are, and to connect from that place of vulnerability is the answer. That courage that I think that would take is the answer to these deep places of excruciating aloneness.
As you're sharing that reminds me that that's one of the other beauties of connecting is we get that sense of encouragement. We can encourage each other just through our way of being, to take risks, to take care of ourselves, to see different perspectives. So there's a real power in connecting with each other that does give us that collective resilience again as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter how comfortable a person is being alone, I think it's still really important that we connect with each other and to take advantage of that truth that we are better together.
That sense of connectedness in a community. We as a panel decided we were going to just share a little bit of ourselves today. And let me tell you a little bit of the journey of coming to Canada and the importance of connectedness in a community. When we decided 5 years ago to literally come from the other side of the world, the southern tip of Africa, to Canada. Of course, it's crazy. It's like, you're fearful, yet you're excited, you're optimistic, you're happy, you're sad. It's just a whole blend of emotions. And then coming into a community like the Sunshine Coast, it's been unreal. It's been unbelievable. We moved into our first house and people brought us food and we were welcomed and we were accepted into the community, integrating into a new workplace. And all of those aspects of life is different ways of connecting, different ways of belonging, and that sense of connectedness in the community is so essential. And my experience has been on the Sunshine Coast, and I'm talking about just here with us locally. It's been so beautiful. It's been so wonderful. And I want to encourage people that are maybe feeling lonely, that don't necessarily desire to be lonely, is to step out a little bit. Sometimes I see people ask, but no one is reaching out to me. And then I always have that thought, but have you been reaching out a little bit? Let it be so for you that you reach out a little bit and see. There are so many ways of connecting, so many meaningful ways. And I can just, I just wanted to share that from experience. My beautiful journey of coming to Canada, how wonderful that's been up until now, and specifically with the focus on connection.
I love that. And I think your piece around for people to reach out, even and ask for support, right? We all need support. We all need validation. We all need relationships. And so to just, risk that vulnerability, risk that courage. Because I often say, do you think people can read your mind? No, we're not really good at that as humans. And so sometimes we have to actually ask for what we need, and risk, because it may not always go well, but more times out of not, it typically does. Maria, Sechelt, the Sunshine Coast is so fortunate to have you. I'm glad you made that trip.
It's been wonderful. And as you're saying that people think you can read minds, I wanted to ask, but you're a psychologist.
I'm pretty good at it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
But not perfect.
Yeah.
I'd much rather somebody just tell me what they need.
Absolutely.
As you guys were speaking, I might just shift gears a little bit because it feels like an important part of where we are around this pandemic. As we're starting to relax some of the pieces around the restrictions or the safe guidelines that we're hearing from public health, one of the issues around loneliness that's coming up is, if our loneliness is coming out of that kind of desperate sense of not knowing who we are, or really that quality where we're super uncomfortable with being on our own, we're perhaps more at risk of not taking it seriously still, the risks. And so we've somehow got to balance this idea of connecting with other people with doing it. I heard a term called radical caution. And I think that's a wonderful term to remind ourselves that there's still a pandemic going on. And are there ways that we can connect, understand our loneliness, understand our need to connect with others, but do it in a responsible way that's good for us and good for other people?
That point is so important, and I want to elaborate even more on that for a little while longer if we can. The importance of this next phase of our pandemic is so essential not to go from 0 to 100. When you've been isolated for a long time and you crave connecting and you just can't wait to get out there, and you hear that certain restrictions are being lifted, we should be so cautious. We should really be taking the advice of public health and realizing that we are very much in the middle of this, and we should be evaluating our own need and motivation and mindset all the time. It is crucially important that we go about this in a responsible way and not just have that sense of, oh, we are free now, the restrictions have been lifted, let's do this, let's go for whatever. No. We should see us as a percentage model. We are just going to be doing a little bit more cautiously, so watching the response. But in order to do that successfully, we all need to be very self-aware. We need to know where we're at. We need to know what we're feeling and how we're thinking. And one of the driving forces for maybe overdoing it is our need for connection. And that's not a bad thing. It's just we need to be aware of it and work with it. So when we go into a little bit of a mindfulness reflection, we should be very much aware of how we're feeling about this topic.
Great. Are you guys ready for that now?
I'm always ready for that.
Okay. Yeah, they're good.
Well, there's lots of different types of mindfulness practices we could explore around connection. And in an ideal world, it would be, for me, literally connecting through communication with each other. So while that's going to be a bit challenging for us to explore today, there's another person we can connect with, which is ourselves. When I train with John Kabat-Zinn, one of the things he would often say is, see what it's like to be in your own good company. And I love that phrase because I think many of us, one of the things that can drive us to seek other relationships is some of us may actually be struggling with how we perceive ourselves. And there may not be as kind a relationship with ourselves that is maybe even possible, or even a sense of that we could do that. And so what I was hoping we might do right now is just do a very brief scan of our bodies, connecting with our bodies as a way to almost reconcile our relationship with how we find our physical self. And of course, when we do this, we're going to come across our own mind because we're going to have judgments that come up. So it's actually a great time for us to connect to how we relate with our own being. And this actually hopefully will give us some fuel to then decide what kinds of connections we want to make with others, because we're perhaps coming from a place with a little bit more kindness for ourselves. So I'm going to invite you to maybe just to take a few moments to feel the ground below you, feel your connection to the earth and maybe even nature itself. And sense that ground that we're all a part of, that supports us day in, day out. And you could connect, if you like, with your breath, another gift that comes to us without us having to do anything. And seeing if you can connect with your breath without needing to change it or modify it. If you notice some judgments coming up about how you're breathing, maybe just seeing if you can make some space around that experience. Let your breath just breathe you. And then in a moment, we're simply going to scan our bodies to feel into how it is to be with us, within us right now. And as you do this, there's no right or wrong way your body's meant to be feeling. There's just the truth of what you notice. And seeing if you can connect in a kind, open, spacious way. Making space for whatever you find. So when you're ready from your breath, maybe letting yourself feel into your head, your scalp, your face. Connecting with any sensations you feel. Be tingling or itching, or pulsing or throbbing. Perhaps really letting yourself connect with places where there's some ease. Letting your awareness go inside of your head and down into the neck. Spreading down through our arms. Just to feel what it's like right now in our arms, right down to our fingertips. And as you're doing this, of course, feelings, thoughts, images might come into your mind, might come into your body. So you could let yourself notice these. In this way, we're connecting to our whole self, however things are. Meeting our body like we might a friend, with an unconditional positive regard. Letting your awareness, if you're ready, move into your torso, your chest, belly, pelvis, back. Noticing what's here to be felt. You might even notice all the places you can feel your breath or feel even your heartbeat. And again, if you notice judgments coming up, seeing if you can just acknowledge them and let them be. So there's no purpose other than simply to connect with how we are physically and, of course, emotionally and mentally as well. So if you're ready, we're going to complete by coming down into our lower half, into the buttocks, down into the legs, scanning any other parts from the pelvis down through our legs, knees, calves, shins, ankles, and feet. It's like we're giving ourselves permission to slow down enough to notice our truth, trusting we can handle it. You might notice pleasant sensations or ones that are less pleasant, so seeing if you can meet all of them. And so perhaps now you've got a sense of your legs, and perhaps to complete, we'll just let ourselves feel our whole body. Connect with the sense of our whole being that's alive right now, even if there's parts that are missing or parts that are not working exactly as we'd like. Connecting with our sense of aliveness, just as we find ourselves. And then if your eyes have been closed, maybe just gently opening your eyes and opening your senses to the world around you and seeing what it's like to connect with the space you're in. Notice what captures your attention, either in visual form or sounds, smells. And perhaps just completing with an awareness of the breath right now that we each are breathing and how it connects us to each other, how it connects us to our community and the natural world around us. And trusting that when we do this, that might help us make wise choices in how we might connect moving forward.
One of the things I find very challenging, yet I realize the value of this, is for someone that's really busy, like myself, not busy in the sense of lots of commitments, but just busyness, slowing down and really just focusing on yourself, being aware of your thoughts, your sensations, your body, your breathing, connectedness. One of the things I realize you've mentioned a few times is being aware of the thoughts and maybe picking up on some judgments that you may have. But what I find interesting about that is just a sense of awareness, just realizing it, just being with that, and not necessarily fixing it. And to me, that is initially challenging, but powerful.
Now we're going to move to questions here. I just have one last thought that to tie back to our theme of resilience, collective resilience. I spent a lot of time thinking about resilience, sort of what I do for a living. And I think of the two parts, and I think your mindfulness meditation right now really brought that to life. We're talking about the importance of social connectedness, that collective care, collective resilience. Resilience is not a do-it-yourself project, right? We need those connections. But the other piece of it is connection to self, emotional regulation, awareness, regulating our own nervous systems. And so we get the two parts. And those two combined is really what we're talking about in terms of good mental health and overall resilience. So thanks for the experiential reminder of that.
Thank you for that. Let's go to questions. For those of you who are watching us live, you can ask questions of the panel through using the chat feature, but we also have been accepting questions in advance. And Jane McDonald is standing by to give us some of those questions. We can't wait.
So hi, everyone from the Sechelt Hospital Foundation. And we'll start with one of the questions that came in from staff here. And that is, how do you support other people in their feelings of loneliness? Any practical suggestions to share on how to approach a loved one who seems to be turning inward during these scary times, when you yourself might be feeling lonely or even a bit burnt out with all the digital stimulation?
Who wants to take that one?
Let's okay. So the two things come to my mind is when I listen to that question. The first one is to acknowledge it. It's a reasonable thing to. I mean, if you know someone and you have a relationship with them and you know that they're lonely and they're struggling, it is very reasonable to open up that point, open up that discussion. And then the thing that I have to do in my personal journey is I have to refrain from fixing or wanting to fix. And I need to move into the place of being So that's how I would approach such a matter. If it's someone that I know, just acknowledge it. This is a challenging time, and I can imagine you must be experiencing some loneliness at the moment, and then maybe don't give too much advice, but I don't know, that's simplistic, but that's how I approach it.
Marius, you're sounding like a psychologist. What's going on here?
See, I tell
That's
you,
a beautiful answer.
That's
a great answer. I was going to say something very similar. There's a last piece there around, though. They're burnt out, and I'm hearing that person is tired, maybe from caregiving if they're in healthcare. And so that makes this a little more challenging. But the frame around not fixing it, just to show up and be, connect, even just, I don't know, take a pot of flowers over and put them outside the door and talk from 6 feet away for a few minutes. I also want to normalize that people are going inward right now. It's been a very stressful time. And so lots of people are on sort of overload and turning inward. And so just to reach out, have an extension of the hand, metaphorically, so to speak, and just to know that they're not alone, that you are there in whatever way might feel okay for both of you.
Thing here is one of the major ways I see us meeting someone's emotional needs is by showing that person that you actually see their need. Yeah. By acknowledging that you probably feel this way, or do you feel this way, or share with me if you do. Just that in itself is essential.
Yeah, I'm noticing.
Bit of connecting. They're noticing. People have a need to be noticed. They want to be heard. Yeah. They want to be. We have a fundamental need that others should know how we feel. So by reaching out and acknowledging someone's emotional state is powerful. You maybe can't do much about them, but that is connecting in itself.
Yeah, I love what you guys said here, and so maybe I'll just add another piece to it that I think one of the ways we can experience loneliness is if we are doing a lot of caregiving and we feel like we have to be strong for other people who are suffering. And then we can feel lonely in the fact that we can't even be seen for our own challenges. So as the caregiver in that question, I wonder what it would be like just to call that person and say, you know what, I sense you're lonely. I'm lonely too. And we might be lonely for different reasons. And what was coming into my mind, I don't know if the person's local or not, but a beautiful way to connect with people right now when you're burnt out is to go for a silent walk in nature, 6 feet apart. I've done that a couple of times, and I've been amazed by how I can connect with another person just through physical proximity, get out into nature where the trees are breathing. They've got tons of oxygen to give us. There's so much life to connect with. And we can, as caregivers, we can actually support ourselves and, like Marius is saying, be with the person without having to actually give much or fix anything. And the paradox is, it actually is incredibly of service.
Here's another one. On the coast, as we see amplified finger pointing, conspiracy theories, and fearful thinking, how can we come together to make empathy and tolerance our default reaction?
Loaded.
Yeah, good question.
We touched on this a little bit yesterday when we reflected on the fact that those in our population that feel more vulnerable, and some people are more vulnerable than others based on comorbidities and various things we won't discuss here now. But for those people, the fear response may now be even more acute than a few weeks ago, because people are sensing, okay, so the world is going to open up. BC is making some changes. Does that mean I'm going to be at higher risk for exposure? So I'm going to double down on my effort to make sure everyone is adhering to guidelines. And so we need to, first and foremost, just have that information, just have that knowledge that everyone is going to be experiencing a different thing here. And where you might be rather confident and happy to connect with a different, maybe extend your bubble a little bit, ever so slightly. For someone else, that might be an extremely fearful thought. So that awareness to me is step one.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add another part to that then, because I like what you're saying, Marius. Awareness is such a big part of this to bring some compassion to the fact that all of us are finding ourselves in different places. And then I would perhaps just add the idea of not adding fuel to the fire through our own reactions and negativity towards those that are acting in certain ways. So perhaps the best thing we can do is just take care of ourselves and do exactly what we're doing here, which is connecting with how we are, meet our needs on an individual basis. And if we do that with other people, we're going to continue to build that sense of collective resilience, so that even if there are members of society who are acting in ways that are dangerous or potentially unsafe for us, hopefully it's like a fire that's just going to burn itself out, where there's no more fuel added to it.
I like that. I can hear from the question that the person gets it. They're trying to be empathic. They're trying to understand why people are acting aggressively or irrationally. And so I would just say, stay the course. It is challenging. I think of sometimes this tend and befriend, like to try to have compassion and empathy for people's bad behavior, understand the function of their behavior, why they're doing what they're doing. That doesn't mean it's easy. If someone's coming at you in a belligerent way or yelling at you inappropriately, that's super challenging. But just take a deep breath, slow down, and try to understand why they're behaving that way, and not then add fuel to the fire. Yeah, but hard.
Here's one regarding some of the residents in our long-term care facilities. We understand that visitors and human connections are absolutely restricted for lots of good reasons. Do we have any concerns about the cumulative impact on both patients and staff once we get through this?
I think we are. I think we're very much aware of the impact that this will have on patients and staff. And I think also that's why the decision makers are forever busy reviewing ways to ensure that we impose the minimal amount of restrictions on people, because those are the most vulnerable in our society. We find that at the ends of that end of the age spectrum, the comorbidities are often higher. Immune systems are affected. So I'm categorically making that statement. Of course, it doesn't hold true for everyone. So it is our absolute, we should be protecting those people. But then the question is at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that comes with isolation. It comes with not connecting with family, and sometimes suffering from a neurocognitive disorder, as an example, and not even understanding, why am I not seeing my family? You can explain 100 times that a certain thing is happening. In certain types of pathology, it's going to be hard to understand. So this is just one of those heartbreaking things that we have to do from a public health point of view, and therefore alternative means of connecting becomes so important. Sending out an iPad into the facility and regular check-ins with your family, virtual contact. I know we've said this 1,000 times, but in a time of distress such as this, what other option do we have? So we need to optimize connection with these means, through these means.
Thank you, Marius, for saying that so well. I'll just maybe add that I do think there's going to be some costs, and because of exactly the reasons you're describing. And what gives me some solace is that, again, coming back to the idea that we are resilient at all ages. And so I trust that even our elder population, hopefully most of them, if not all of them on the community, are going to get through this without exposure to COVID-19. And there's going to be ways to support people, not only now, but certainly through time. And my experience with stresses, anxieties, and trauma we have ways individually and collectively to move through these challenges. So I hope that we can see that our actions right now are in the best interest of those that we love, and trust that we'll find ways to address things that right now simply aren't possible.
Both of your answers make me think about the prevalence of loneliness before COVID, before the pandemic. And so certainly people are more isolated now, perhaps, but there's a whole lot of people really feeling disconnection and isolation before. And so maybe with the amplification now, and we're seeing this, we'll change some of our ways and our values around connection after this, and really prioritize our humanness and our need for connection, and the simple loving gestures that we can do that make a big difference in people's lives.
an ever never say die optimist, and I believe that even during times of significant and severe adversity, good will come forth from that. We will see different things coming to our attention that existed, Lisa, as you're saying. But this will force us to look at this again, because loneliness in the residential care centers is not a topic that is new. But this will bring a fresh look at this topic, and we will be able to improve. And so seeing this as a time of sacrifice for some good that can come from this. And I know it sounds optimistic. That's just how I am. But I really do believe that. And I believe we'll be seeing that.
One last question. This is from a young parent, evidently. How do you suggest supporting young children who are missing their peers and craving friendships? Parents are great, but it's hard to know exactly what we're allowed to do as the rules seem to be constantly changing and unclear.
Yeah, I'm hearing this a lot from parents, from friends, from my children. What are the rules anyways, and how are we allowed? For a family of 4, can we add 2 more people? Are we increasing our bubble? How do we do this? Can I go play with who? It's really confusing, I think, right now, and that's causing anxiety. My kids are actually saying, "No, I'm not allowed. I really miss my friends, but but no, their anxiety is actually high." And so I think it's going to be a case of let's wait and see what happens in the coming weeks. I mean, if they're talking about schools opening, that's really interesting to me of how that's going to be managed. I guess it depends on the kid's age. There's developmental factors here. My kids are I'm encouraging them so much to go into the Zoom classrooms and actually just connect and see their friends, make social contacts. They're writing letters, which is kind of fun. They're seeing each other at a distance, a few of them. It's just trying to be creative. But man, with little kids at home, no, it's not all about parents. They need their friends. They need those social connections. And so I want to say it's coming. Try to be patient. So hard.
And then that part about feeling confused because the guideline seems to be changing all the time. I want to encourage you to know that it is indeed changing all the time, and it will continue to change. There will be many more changes to come, because this is as the process unfolds, guidelines are being made, and based on what we see in the community, based on various epidemiological factors, different guidelines are put in place. So it's going to be changing, but it's about remaining very much informed. And last night, as I was going for a walk, I walked down the hill here, and I saw 4 cars parked quite a distance away from each other, with all the trunks open up, and 4 people visiting. And I thought to myself, how wonderfully creative is that? Perfectly safe, creative, connecting. So maybe that might not be ideal for your 2-year-old toddler, but you can always lock the doors and just open the window a little bit.
I think it's such a great question, and actually one that needs a whole hour. And so maybe just to share, there's a great opportunity coming up. If you don't know, the Sunshine Coast Child and Youth Mental Health team is holding a virtual town hall on May 21st at 11 a.m. And so that's being jointly hosted by the school district as well as the divisions of family practice. And so there's a wide number of panelists that are going to be there. And I think hoping to address these kinds of questions exactly, because there's so much that needs to be unpacked here. So hopefully, if you go to one of those websites, the School District 46 or the Divisions of Family Practice on the Sunshine Coast, you'll get access to register those events.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. As usual, a fantastic conversation. I, for one, am extremely grateful for the connection that we fostered here in this group, in this panel, and also for the connection that we are building with the community, because we have had fantastic response to these sessions from the community, and I think that's a connection that we need to continue to cultivate. Thank you again to our generous sponsor, the Sunshine Coast Credit Union. Thank you to Taryn, our technical director from Vasari Media Group, who keeps us honest and online. Thank you all for tuning in and being part of this community conversation. Now, speaking of loneliness and disconnection, we are going to take a week off. Yes, we're taking a break for the long weekend. So we are inviting you to join us 2 weeks from now. That'll be May the 26th, if my calendar is correct. We're going to look at navigating reintegration. As Lisa was saying, when we start to loosen up, how do we go about doing that? So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that so that you don't make my mistake and start speed dating your entire family and then having to go to bed early as a result. So in the meantime, thank you very much once again for joining us. Stay well, stay connected, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time on the 26th of May. Bye for now.